Everyone. Great. So hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I think it's good afternoon everywhere in the world, in New York and Germany, from where Mariam is, and Haytham as well. So I think we're all on the same page in that way. Thank you all for being here. This is an event organized by the Kevorkian Center for Near Eastern Studies, and it's titled The Present Past, Justice Through and Beyond Transitional Justice in Post-Revolution Tunisia. And this is a truly transnational event spanning 3 continents, North America here in New York, and Germany, Europe, and Africa, where Tunisia is. So this shows us the possibilities that are available when we can organize events online through Zoom. I'll start with introducing the speakers today. I'd like to thank both of you for making the time to be here online. So Mariam Salehi is a researcher at the intersection of peace and conflict studies and international politics. She is currently leading a research group on transnational conflicts at the Interact Center for Interdisciplinary Peace and Conflict Research at Freie Universität Berlin. Her research focuses on struggles for justice, change, and knowledge orders. She has recently published a book on the Tunisian transitional justice process entitled Transitional Justice in Process, Plans and Politics in Tunisia. And our second speaker, who is currently in Tunis, right, Haytham? You're in Tunis, not in Gafsa at the moment, right? Yes, okay.
Yes, I'm in Tunis, yeah.
Tunis, okay. Yeah. So Haytham Gasmi Smida is a member of Manish Msameh youth movement and a former program officer on gender and reparation at the International Center for Transitional Justice. And the format for today is that each speaker will have 50 minutes to kind of give an overview of their thoughts on justice based on their research or their activism and over the past years. And then we'll move on to a Q&A. I'll ask them a few questions, and then we'll move on to questions from the audiences. Okay, so let's start with Mariam.
Yeah, thanks for the nice introduction, Ola. And yeah, you gave us some small tasks to prepare, right, for today's input talk. And Ola asked us to talk about competing notions of justice, contestation over citizenship, political subjectivity, and the global question of democracy and human rights. And I will walk through the Tunisian transitional justice process in somewhat chronological order and try to touch upon these issues along the way. And yeah, maybe I start with the book that Ola has talked about. And in the book, I differentiate between 3 stages of transitional justice. The first one I call initiating transitional justice. The second one I call designing transitional justice. And the third one I call performing transitional justice. And these stages, they are temporally defined, but they also have some analytical value to them. And what we can see in these stages is that there were also competing or changing notions of justice and transitional justice in particular. So in what I call initiating transitional justice, and I would temporally set that at like between 2011 and 2012, right after the revolution, there were some ad hoc measures. Some other authors would call them revolutionary justice measures, but yeah, I think ad hoc measures fits quite well. So that were measures of justice that were introduced right after the revolution, and mostly based on still like old regime legislation and also like Tunisian domestic initiatives, right? So that included, for example, trials before military courts for killing and violence during the revolution. Then also some civil trials for like socio-economic or for economic crimes. You had first reparation measures. And then there are some things that are sometimes included in the discourse on like ad hoc justice measures, for example, like the investigation commissions also on these violations during the revolution, but then also on economic crimes. And then, for example, there were some would also include within these ad hoc measures the fact that people were excluded to run for parliament or for the Constitutional Assembly that had links to the old regime. But at the same time, you could also see that there were first efforts of international transitional justice professionals to start working in the country. There were first explorations of the International Center for Transitional Justice that also started very early on during this phase. And what I find quite interesting is that at that point in time, and you can look at academic literature, but also at I mean like more popular media, these kind of things, discussions about transitional justice in Tunisia, they usually included all these different measures that were introduced ad hoc and not necessarily based on or accompanied by international transitional justice professionals. And then in the second stage, what I would call designing transitional justice, we could see like an institutionalization of transitional justice and also stronger engagement of the so-called justice industry. There was a participatory law drafting process with a national dialogue, a so-called national dialogue for transitional justice, which consulted people all over the country, and a technical committee made up of civil society representatives and representatives of the Ministry of Human Rights and Transitional Justice that existed at that time. And the law that was drafted that provides for the establishment of transition justice institutions, such as the Truth and Dignity Commission, that was then later established. And it was the first one to be established, but also specialized chambers in the Tunisian court system. Sorry. And since we're talking about competing notions of justice, what I found really interesting is that at that point in time, one could see a shift in meaning of transitional justice. So what I often got to hear in my research when I started working on transitional justice in Tunisia in early 2014 was that transitional justice hasn't even started yet. Transitional justice was delayed. And so this notion then kind of excluded the earlier ad hoc measures that were then seen as transitional justice from what transitional justice would mean and entail, because the focus would then be on these institutions that would be developed through this institutionalized process, and that was brought about with the support or involvement of international experts. And then in the third stage, what I would call performing transitional justice, I think there's a double meaning in this word, and about what that means. And on the one hand, it means carrying out the work, right? If you perform something, you do what you have to do, basically. I mean, like the Truth Commission started to work and actually started collecting files of potential victims, and at some point also started to do hearings, closed hearings and also public hearings. but performing also has a sense of staging, right? Or a meaning of staging. And what I could see in my research is that there were lots of people who had the impression that lots of what the Truth Commission as central institution and everything that went around it was doing was kind of performative and staged, and didn't get to the effect that it provided a real sense of justice. Yeah, I mean, I put that out here for discussion, but that is something that I definitely encountered, this this sense that the work was more performative than substantial. Although, I mean, there were definitely lots of things happening, right? Then, yeah, like touching upon your questions regarding contestation over citizenship and political subjectivity, I would say that transitional justice in Tunisia definitely had a lot to do with struggle over politics and power. And at the beginning, that definitely had something to do with the question of who can take part in shaping the future architecture of the Tunisian state, right? Because transitional justice has this or carries with it this idea that people should be held accountable for violations of the old regime, and it should also transform structures ideally. So it should not only have a backward-looking dimension, but also a forward-looking dimension. And so that would be one aspect. And then the second one would be who or whose grievances are addressed in the institutionalized transitional justice project, who can participate in it and who can also potentially profit from it. And the Truth and Dignity Commission, and I mean the law overall, but yeah, the Truth Commission had a very broad mandate. It was going in terms of temporal mandate, it was going back to the year before independence, 1955, mid-1955. So it was covering, or it has been covering both dictatorships. It has been covering both political and physical human rights violations, and also socioeconomic marginalization. And the goal was also to advise on structural reforms in various sectors of the state. So not only reforming basically a state bureaucracy, but I mean, the law provides for the Truth and Dignity Commission to give recommendations on also structural reforms in the judicial sector, in the economic sector, in the media sector. So it basically, it could have covered everything, ideally. And so what I want to talk about a bit more now is, because I think it links quite well with, or maybe it links with what Haytham is going to do, is the socioeconomic part of the mandate, because this is actually also in terms of like transitional justice literature, it's quite interesting and seen as yeah, so transitional justice literature for a very long time has lamented the neglect of socioeconomic issues in transitional justice. And what we could see in Tunisia is that there was definitely an inclusion of these issues in the law, and also the idea that these issues should be covered because they were so important for the grievances of a large part of Tunisian society. That was definitely there, right? And so that was quite innovative. For example, in the Tunisian transitional justice law, also regions could be seen as victims and not only individuals, and which basically hinted at also this like socioeconomic and political marginalization. So the idea was definitely fitting with the problems, right, of having this broad mandate and covering like lots of different things, and especially also covering socioeconomic issues. But I would quickly refer to one article I've published in the Journal of Intervention in State Building, which is called Trying Just Enough or Promising Too Much, the Problem Capacity Nexus in Tunisia's Transitional Justice Process. And I would say, well, the problems were, like the problem definition was good, but the execution then basically didn't pay attention to that it was just too much. And the institutions were not able to actually deliver on the promises, which then is of course also a problem. And I had like lots of my interview partners, they were kind of blaming the mission creep and the overarching mandate also on the inclusion of, or the strong focus on socioeconomic issues, because they said we actually cannot get this done, it's just too much, it's not the core task, and then also like how should we give any kind of recommendations for economic reforms, because we this is not something that we can actually do in this format, and there are other institutions of the state that should take care of that, which I actually find quite interesting, because this is something that is often transitional justice institutions are often blamed for, that they think about that they think holistically and try to include everything, but then they don't think in connections with other state institutions, and think that transitional justice institutions, they can cover everything. And like before my 15 minutes are over, a few sentences on the question of political subjectivity that you raised. I would say that from the very beginning, one could see an exclusion or sidelining of younger people. I put that in quotation marks because the definition of younger is quite, it stretches. Or those who did the revolution, those who were maybe less formally organized, and those who were less embedded in institutions already. And in the transition justice process, it's very apparent because, for example, members of the Truth Commission had to be at least 30 years old. So that excluded already like a large part of Tunisian society from playing like a substantial role in this process. And I think it also excluded a large part of Tunisian society that on the one hand, should have played a role in this process because they were also actually victims. But then also if we think about a forward-looking dimension, then those who shape the process, they shouldn't also, it should include those who will have to live within the state in the future, and also potentially are able to take on political positions of power. And technically and also practically, the transitional justice process didn't serve those who continued to be marginalized politically and economically, because the mandate stopped with the issuance of the law, which is at the end of 2013, right? But then the work just started, and this means in the meanwhile, those who were still suffering from these oppressive structures and the political and economic marginalization, they actually they weren't served by this process because it was the mandate only ran until 2013. So those who could potentially profit from the process, that were only those who experienced grievances before that point in time, although the structures actually continue to exist. And I would say that the process especially was not able to deliver on its forward-looking ambition of changing structures. And I'm happy to talk more about the details of the backward-looking dimensions and questions of like reparations and truth finding and public hearings and so on later. But I thought that this is what I thought I could say so far, to also provide an opening for Haytham to get in.
Right, so thank you very much for this comprehensive overview of the transitional justice process, but also picking up on very particular patterns that were happening and tensions that were arising within that process that hopefully Haytham can speak to, and then we can open it up for discussion further. So go ahead, Haytham.
So thank you so much for the invitation and for the presentation. What I need to start with about the ideas that I'm going to test with you is that in a post-revolutionary phase, a transitional justice is the mirror of the revolution that has happened. Because the thing with the revolution in Tunisia, that it happened without an organization and without a leadership. So we spent like a lot of time surprised of the incomes of the revolution, that because nobody could ever imagine that Ben Ali can be gotten rid of, and in the same time, no organization had a program for what would happen in the afternoon of the revolution. So what actually happened is like we lost like 9 months before the preparation for the for the new constitution, before the elections in October, and we had like 8 or 7 months of a governance by a figure from the two ancient regimes, the Bourguiba regime and the Ben Ali regime, which is Beji Qaid Sibsi. So in this whole climate, we went directly to what is technical about the transitional justice, forgetting about what is political. And I'm coming from like two backgrounds. The first one, chronologically and consciously, was my as we call it, participation in the revolution. I was there in the streets during the days of the 17th December 2010 and 14 January 2011, and afterwards in the accumulation of struggles that happened, that gave birth to the campaign that I was in, which is Manish Msamah, I'm not forgiving. The whole process was all characterized by campaigns. There were no political parties, no organized organizations, if we can call them so, but it was only campaigns. One of the first campaigns that happened in Tunisia after the revolution was the demands for the rights of the martyrs and the wounded of the revolution. These were the first struggles that we needed truth, we needed accountability for the people who killed people. They didn't just steal. I'm not saying that that's less or more, I'm not comparing, but they killed. They shot people in heads and chests and killed them, and we buried them. And we didn't know who are these people, just for accountability. Nobody asked for revenge or something. It's just institutional accountability. So we had like a predisposition to believe in institutions, or was it a stronger propaganda or something? But I don't know. We had a predisposition to accept institutions, and that's why the people in the sitting of Qasba 2, which was in February and March 2011, 1 month after the escaping of the president, some people called for a constitutional institution, a constitutional elections and the constitutional assembly. During the period between 2011 and 2015, as I said, there have been a lot of campaigns against the criminalization of the people who participated in the revolution, saying the campaign was named "I Set Fire on a Police Office Too." This is the tentative translation, but it means that we participated in the revolution violently, and we're not supposed to be accountable for that because we didn't take lives, we didn't cross a the same line that the police persons crossed. So in the accumulation of these campaigns led to the making it. It was a historical accumulation that led to the creation of Menachem Samah, just 1 year after the what we call in Tunisia the compromise situation, which was the 2014 elections that led to the old regime and the new wannabe regime have a compromise to not kill each other, to not annihilate each other, and to govern hand by hand. So the first thing that was, because the president has the privilege to propose and suggest laws to the parliament. The first, and I think the only law that was proposed by the president was the amnesty of the business persons who had ill-gotten assets in during the pre-revolutionary era. So this was a declaration of intentions. This was a declaration of interest, and it was a description and a mirror of what did the revolution lead to in the absence of a leadership and an organization. So during Menachem Samah, we tried to be in between what is called the revolutionary process and what it's called the democratic transitional process. So we worked with the TDC and we worked with the street. We worked with the families of the martyrs and the wounded persons of the revolution, and we worked with the parliament. So we needed to have like every means to stop that law. And fortunately, unfortunately, we got rid of the 2/3 of that law, and 1/3 got passed in 2017. After my experience in Menachem Samah stopped to be just after the passing of the law, because la raison d'être doesn't exist anymore. So we did like some meetings to discuss the future, but we agreed that there will be no future for Menachem Samah as long as the law was passed. Personally, in that phase, I was not satisfied with what happened, and as was Menachem Samah in the other end of how to deal with the political public affairs, I went to the what I call the other end, which is the real institutional end, and I worked in ICTJ. To be honest, I was solicited by the people who work in ICTJ to be hired because of my history in Menachem Samah and some of my knowledge, especially with civil society and with the people in the ground. So when I got to this job, and it's a job, it's not just militancy, I was surprised by how much institution can be alienated and can alienate people from what they really want. Because I'm not a big fan of spontaneity, but on the other hand, I feel like too much organization and too much bureaucracy and too much institutionalization can lead to what I call forgetting about the cause, or getting involved in a lot of details until we forget about what was the main purpose. It's like cooking. When we prepare like a lot of things, we lose a lot of energy and a lot of materials, and you forget that we are cooking just a meal. So that's what happened when I was working in ICTJ. It's the problem. Maybe I was more enthusiastic about a lot of stuff, but I know that it's la raison d'être of ICTJ is doing things in the institutional way because it's an international center, so it needs to respect the laws of the country where they work. So, and they are in uh, a precarious situation because it's not the state, it's not, they're not elected people didn't ask them to work on this stuff. So there was like a uh, crippled process that I saw with my bare eyes in the TDC. Even though I was hired in ICTJ after the TDC, uh, uh, there was, like, as Mariam said, and I joined her strongly on the idea of performing transitional justice. There were when we find like a lot of works of art, works of like superficial memorization, etc. You look back and you find people who lost their legs, who lost their sons, their daughters, their people, uh, and they don't even have like a medical care card to enter a hospital. You feel like you're doing something nihilistic. So in a way, the idea of transition, when a transition takes too long, it's not a transition anymore. It's a phase. It's a situation. It's not a separation between two eras. It's a continuity in a way. So what happened in Tunisia, that what we call transitional justice or democratic transition, it was all performative. It was all with institutions. We had like the first assembly, the second assembly. We had like, and that was a bit racist, saying the first Arabic country to have so there was this exceptionalism in a way that didn't really talk and speak to people who are involved in public affairs. The people, as Mariam said, the people who have socioeconomic demands, the people um, who have a history with this regime, who were tortured, who were killed, who were orphaned, who were etc. So, and after that, in 25th of July, we had a president who is a close friend, and we know it from videos, we know it from the declaration of a lot of wounded people of the revolution and the families of the martyrs. And he's also, being a professor of law, he was always choosing the institutional way, even though he was so close, he was so popular, he was voted by these people, he was supported by these people. When he went to govern, when he became a president, he still believed in the institution. Maybe I don't say that I know everything, or I discovered everything, or I had like the experience of other people, but I think that maybe the institution may be the answer. But the institution is a the institution is an idea. It's idealistic in a way. Okay, we need to have institutions, for example, like ministries. We need to have like institutions for marginalized people, for women, for anything, for education, for transportation, etc. But it needs to be implemented on an idea that speaks to the people, that is related to the problems of the people. in a way that, as much as it is idealistic, it needs to be materially translated in the daily life of people. So for the memory of these 10 years, we've been exhausted. I am considered as from the generation of the youth of the youth of the revolution. I was 19 when everything happened. But I have right now, I have friends whom we call the children of the revolution, who are like 10 years younger than me. And I don't feel like I have, as old people say, lessons to transmit to people afterwards, because nothing really happened during these 10 years. We just had institutions with no substance. Even with the elections, we had the ancien regime, and that's exhausting. That's saddening. But with these institutions, how can, as much as we know that institutions are good in a way, are good in context, how are we still going to convince people to believe in these institutions and to create more institutions? And this seems like a dead end somehow, some way. Thank you, and sorry for the depressive ending.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Haitham, for this sobering account of like firsthand account, especially moving between these two spaces, like the contestation through the social movements and Manish Musaymah, and I witnessed that firsthand with you guys on the ground in L'avenue Habib Bourguiba when you were protesting against the reconciliation law in 2017, and also to hear your reflections on the actual institutionalized part of transitional justice as an idea, how it gets contained in these institutions and the kind of possibilities and limitations of that institutionalization. And Mariam can speak more to the kind of politics and operations of the inside, giving us an inside view of how that played out, and also the TDC's relation with other state institutions and the extent to which it was effective or not, even in carrying out those reforms that are performative. Even then, trying to do that was in itself a failure to an extent. So thank you for these contrasting views or different perspectives on the same process and different ways of understanding what the transitional process is and what it does. So I'll start with a question actually to both of you. So both of you brought up different critiques of the transitional justice process, whether it's institutional in its institutional guise or as an idea that is being enacted by social movements. And one of the main critiques actually of the transition to democracy that you alluded to is that it domesticates revolution and contains its radical potential, reducing it to a set of laws and policies that fail to respond to the demands of the people for bread, freedom, and social justice and human dignity, which were the mottos of the protesters on the street. And the question I have, one for Mariam and another for Haitham, in relation to that idea of domesticating the revolution that both of you were alluding to. So for Mariam, what ways did the larger context in which the Truth and Dignity Commission was embedded shape its work? And so if you can talk about that particular idea in relation to the broad mandate of the commission, and how seriously was the commission taken by other state institutions, and how effective was its work even in carrying these out? And you spoke about performance. the performativity of not just in a fictitious sense, but also in performing the state. So the state itself was being performed, this aspired to state, through the TDC. So if you can speak about that in relation to your fieldwork and the insights of your book. And then I'll on to Haitham. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks a lot. First of all, to Haitham for the input and perspectives, and to Ola for the question. Yeah, I think it's really a great question, and I probably start early, and you need to stop me because I think I could talk about that for quite a bit. So the context in which the Truth and Dignity Commission came into being, I mean, I already hinted at that in my first input, was that at first there was a participatory process of developing the law, right? And civil society was involved in this process. I mean, we can talk about like what kind of civil society was involved, but there was, officially there were 5 civil society participants and 1 participant from the ministry in the so-called technical committee of developing the law. So those people I talked to, they actually had the feeling that they, or the impression that they had quite a say in this. But there would also be parts of civil society that would criticize that there was a Ministry for Human Rights and Transitional Justice at all. So that was already perceived as politicizing, in quotation marks, the transitional justice process. And to some degree, I don't like the word politicizing in this context, because I think transitional justice is inherently political. And so it doesn't have to be rendered political, right? Because it is already. I mean, I think it might be more useful to talk about this, or think about this maybe with regard to Jelena Subotic's term of like hijack justice. So people at the very early stage were already concerned with this process being hijacked by politics and political interests. And I mean, through the participation of, or through the existence of a ministry at all, so not, also the hijacking of the idea, and not only about the institution that was still about to become, right? But then what I think is quite interesting, and what is what has been described to me as a crucial point in actually manifesting or this impression that the institution was political, is that Parliament amended the law before they passed it, and they decided to keep the prerogative of nominating truth commissioners to themselves. So initially there was an idea that there should be also civil society participation in nominating truth commissioners, and that was then actually ruled out by Parliament. A parliamentary commission was then set up to nominate truth commissioners. And so I interviewed quite a few people who were part of this parliamentary committee during that time. So I was in the assembly. They nominated a set of 15 people, and then the population had the option of objecting to some of them, and there would be hearings, right? And I was in the assembly while these hearings for the objections were being had, and basically the committee just confirmed everyone, although there were a few people who, according to the rules that were specified in the law, they shouldn't have become members of the commission. For example, the rules said something like former parliamentarians, or those who had served in parliament under the old regime, they shouldn't be able to become members of the Truth and Dignity Commission. And then there was one person being nominated, and then it was justified because he didn't serve a full term. And so there were these like loopholes being made, right? To basically justify a set of commissioners that was carefully maybe like in hard negotiations negotiated between different political factions. And so this is something that I often heard from the very beginning, that people also said, like, this is a political institution. The commissioners, they are like put in there according to the political strength of parties in parliament, and that then this would also be reflected in the work, and it would somehow take trust away of the institution as something that could actually be independent from the state. And with regard to how seriously was the commission taken, I think one could answer that question in two ways, right? On the one hand, one could say it has had a really bad reputation because of this these political accusations, and then also I mean, like, people had the impression that the commission wouldn't get anything done, and that there were incidents about commissioners like getting cars, and then some scandals about that, basically, and then there was lots of infighting in the commission, and then so there were lots of these discussions about that, but my impression was that it was, I mean, must have been taken seriously to some degree, because the government, especially after 2014, also tried to fight it, right, and to not let it do its work as best as it could have done. I mean, as I said, so that it didn't get as much done as it could have was probably also due to the animosities within the commission. So like the infighting, the commissioners not really working together, but against each other, these kind of thing. But there were also, I mean, there were more subtle ways of trying to somehow hinder the work, for example, but the budget coming late, or parliament not replacing defected commissioners, so these kind of things. And then also more not so subtle ways of trying to obstruct the work, as Haytham already said, with the reconciliation law, and then with the public hearings, for example, they were moved from central Tunis to the outskirts, to a smaller venue, so that people it took more effort to actually look at them. But then on the other hand, I mean, the commission was actually able to do quite a lot of things, right? I mean, the public hearings, they were broadcasted via television, like prime time. They got some money. They had like over 600 staff members at their most. So I think it's a bit of the blame game. It's a bit hard to pinpoint what went wrong. But in terms of domesticating the revolution, maybe, I mean, of course, I would generally join in with the grim outlook, but I think the most revolutionary things that come out of this process, they were actually coming out at the very end, because I recently talked to someone about the state of going back pre-independence with a mandate, right? And so I was told that at the beginning, this was just to avoid the Independence Day as a date. So, and maybe to cover the Yusuf issue, or like the inner Tunisian struggles over leadership in the independence movement. But then the commission actually used this as an entry point for asking questions of colonial responsibility for violence and repression, and continuities between colonial oppressive rule and dictatorial rule, and And one of my interview partners said that, yeah, there's a radical notion in that regard because it's going back, going back to the roots, right? And so I think there are these few openings that one could say that I mean they aren't going away, right? There are lots of things that have been uncovered and people have talked about, and then there are these few openings that might give some opportunities to later, I don't know, draw on. But that would be the one small positive thing, yeah, I would throw in here as a point for discussion. And now I've talked enough, I think.
Great. So thank you so much for your response, and I'll move on to Haytham. So Haytham, you talked about the mirror of the revolution when you were initially describing the Aspire to process of transitional justice. And I wanted to go back to Manish Masameh in particular, so you can give us more of a kind of what are the day-to-day being part of Manish Masameh, what was it like day-to-day? What was the actual work of alternative mechanisms for pursuing justice in the post-revolution periods? There were, and also if you can talk about this idea of the campaign as a form that then became prevalent in post-revolution politics in Tunisia, and the kind of justice approach to justice that you, as Manish Masameh, were operating with, like what kind of justice? Because one of the critiques was this legal judicial understanding of justice reduces it to civil and political rights, excluding other social and economic rights, ways in which violence and harm was being framed as individual, and we talked about this a lot, and what was Manish Masameh's relationship to these ideas and how they attempted to unfold them or contest them, and what was your day-to-day work like being part of a social movement in that particular moment in 2017, at the time when the reconciliation law was being discussed?
Well, in fact, I was a student during these days of Samah. In fact, we were always we had our tools of meeting, whether it's physically or online, and we were always paying attention to what happens in the parliament, because that's where the reconciliation law is discussed and supposed to be passed. So generally, we always pay attention to events, and when we have the information that the law is going to be discussed, we assemble and we do our meetings, and we decide how to mobilize both in the streets and in the parliament, because we did a lot of discussions with a lot of parliament members to counter this law, or to break it or something. So what we really had as a power was the popular mobilization, because we kind of worked hard on how to be more popular and more appealing to a huge, to a big the different branches of the society. To be fair, the law itself was so insolent that a lot of people were against it, with or without the campaign. What kind of justice we were demanding? The situation, as I told you, it was the compromise between the new regime and the old regime, which are both on the same line. It was a minimum of institutional justice, a minimum of truth, a minimum of dignity for the people, a minimum of not really insulting the people, with this kind of laws and proposition of laws that really let's even imagine that no revolution happened. The fact that we reconcile with people who stole from the public money is a huge problem. What to say if it's in a post-revolutionary phase? And I think that the guts that the people who proposed it, they really did a good reading of history, because after the 2014 elections, a lot of people said that right now the only way to change is the institutional change through the parliament, and if we are not happy with the law or something, we need to wait 5 years until the next elections come. And it became this performative, because some things can change after 5 years, and that's what happened in 2017 when the law was passed. We couldn't change the 2019 with the new elections. So that was our day-to-day life, paying attention to news and to the decisions in the parliament, and working to mobilize. We had like national mobilization. It was not only in the capital, but also in many other regions of Tunisia. And we used to have like big waves of mobilization and protests all over the country. And we finished with the national manifestation in the capital, like the one that we had in July 25th, 2016, and the one in 27th of April 2017, and 13 of 13 of May 2017. So these were like huge protests in the capital and in different regions of Tunisia. I hope I answered the whole question.
Great, yeah, thank you. So I will open the floor now for questions from the audience. So you can raise your hand or type it. Yes, both options are available since we're online. I mean, I have many more questions, but I don't want to be selfish. I can always have other side conversations with you both, but I want to leave this opportunity for the audience to have like enough time for them to ask questions.
Otherwise, I could also just jump in and ask a question to Haytham, actually. With the
Sure, go ahead.
No,
yeah, people can take more time to
yeah, because I was mostly following these the struggle over the reconciliation from abroad. So I was in Tunisia, but not for longer periods of time during that year. And so I was following it a lot on Twitter, I have to say. And I was spending nights, as you said, you were paying attention to Parliament. I was spending nights in front of the Al Bawsalatika, seeing now what is happening, who's voting for what. And my impression was that, I mean, there was always beforehand a discussion that this is now done, right? So people will vote for it and then it will go through. And then in terms of like commentary, it seemed to me that then people were often like, oh, apparently politicians didn't vote and it didn't go through. Were you in contact with some of the politicians? So in terms of like, were they being in touch and checking with you as a social movement about the votes, or was that independent from each other, basically, that they were then just seeing the popular support that the movement had? And yeah.
In fact, we had like a connection with what we consider as allies. Allies for us in the parliament are the people who are against the law and who describe their opinion about it. So yeah, we had this connection, and we kind of lobbied with them to counter the law, but their number was too small for for a vote. So finally, yeah, we had this connection.
Right, so we do have a question in the chat. It's a broad series of questions. What are the key lessons for those supporting transitional justice internationally? Were there mistakes made in the design by those helping guide the process externally, like UNDP, United Nations, and the ICTJ? And do civil society organizations in Tunisia feel they should have engaged with the process differently? Looking back, couldn't have been made less technical.
I can definitely say something about that, but
yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I mean, maybe I start from the end backwards, because there were actually some parts of civil society that were kind of boycotting the institutionalized process after Parliament decided to not let civil society participate in nominating truth commissioners. And these parts of civil society, they then also decided, for example, not to nominate their people to the Truth Commission because they were unhappy with the nomination procedure and didn't think that it was legitimate. And some of them were also thinking that there could have been a better law and that one should boycott the process because one wants to have a better law, a new law. And I spoke to at least one person who was part of that civil society coalition that decided not to nominate their own people to the Truth Commission, who afterwards regretted it and said, like, okay, we should have stayed, we should have been, it wasn't his words, my words now, be more realistic about what was possible. I mean, in 2014, I talked to someone from ICTJ who at that point already said, like, they won't get a better law, right? We have to work with what we have because it will be this law or it won't be any law at all. Because, I mean, there were also elections then, and it was pretty clear that the window of opportunity for transition justice was closing already. Yes, I definitely heard that from interview partners that they regretted later on that at the beginning they decided to not participate as much as they could, but that's probably one voice, right, or one strand of voices. There may be other ones. And I mean, with regards to design, so I mean, I would say the design is definitely shaped by what the transitional justice industry has to offer. But how exactly it looked like also, I mean, Tunisian actors had a lot of influence in it, right? And what I heard from my interview partners that, and there we are maybe at the mistakes of international actors, is that that there was everything in there also had something to do with international actors all trying to have their pet issues included, right? So I mean, what I heard, I don't know, is, for example, that UNDP really wanted to have institutional reform included in the law, and this is why it was put in, or that they pushed for it, or and so that one of the reasons it was so broad and I mean, positive word would be ambitious, negative word would be overwhelming. That, I mean, this idea of the justice industry of a holistic approach that is needed normatively, and then also lobbying for certain things being included, that this was definitely part of it. But I mean, and Haytham already hinted at that. I also heard voices that said basically, yeah, we want this to be a model process, like Tunisian voices. So we want this to be an example also for other countries. And so this is why we want to have everything, right? So there was definitely agency in the design that was not only with the international actors, but also with some parts of Tunisian civil society and political sphere. I mean, there are some people who have been involved who would say that there was too much involvement of the internationals. I have to say that in my interviews, I explicitly asked people about this like interference or support thing, and most of the time, what I got from civil society was like, ICTJ, for example, has been very supportive. They have been helping us, and the UN organizations were seen as more critical because they were also working closer with the government. So as a like broad distinction, I don't know whether this is reflecting, whether this is reflecting just those parts of civil society I've spoken to, or whether this is more reflective of a general sentiment. I can say that. And could it have been made less technical? Yeah, not so sure about it, because what this was all about was actually pretty technical, right? And it was about how to set up the state-of-the-art transitional justice project, and what I heard also from some of the transitional justice professionals is that they were not seeing like the real revolutionary work as part of the process. I mean, one example was that I talked to one transitional justice practitioner in Tunis at some point, who had just been leading a workshop, and he was like, yeah, but why weren't the Tunisians doing a land reform, right? I mean, in a revolution, the first thing you have to do is a land reform, and that should have been happening even before we set up a project like this. So I think this project, as it was hard to be less technical, but there could have been other ways maybe to provide for a less technical idea of transition just from the start. Yeah.
I know maybe Haytham, you want to weigh in on this question of international organizations and the role and the extent to which civil society in domestic civil society were able to kind of repurpose these the design and to make it more responsive to local actors or not.
Yeah, sure. For the like key, the first question is the key recommendation, etc. I say the faster the better always, because if a transitional process takes so long, it's no longer a process of the transition. It's an implication of a system, and it's a part of the system. For the international organizations and civil society, it's the spirit of the era. It's finally we're living in a new liberal era. Politics, as Mariam said, that we say that we need processes and decisions are depoliticized in a way, but they are fully chargedly politicized in a way that we don't need to talk about the socioeconomic problems. We don't need to talk about how and why and when did these grievances happen, and what system made it possible for these grievances to happen. and what are the main problems behind this kind of systems to be implemented. So I guess finally these organizations are just responding to what is the general political line in the world. It's not only in Tunisia. So as much as they have a role somehow, I guess that it needs to be implemented internally, and contradictions need to be resolved internally from the people to the people. And these organizations must have like a restricted line or a restricted way of interfering in local, national, and internal problems. So this is what I think generally.
Great, thank you. So that question was from Lawrence Robinson, by the way. Thank you for your question, Lawrence. Other questions, thoughts, reflections?
I just quickly wanted to add that I think that this technocratization is actually like serving particular political purposes, right? So it is deeply political that the process was implemented or designed in such a technocratic or technical way. So I think there is not a contradiction between something being political and something being technocratic in this particular constellation, because some political actors had an interest in the process looking exactly as it did. So that would be an argument that I would be making.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for putting it in those terms, like the kind of you're highlighting the political work that the discourse of the technical does, basically, in the situation of transitional justice, which is also a critique that is made of human rights, right, in general, as being as doing this kind of work, presenting their work as technical on some level, whereas it's deeply political, and there's different meanings for what political means in this context. So in the context of Tunisia, there's a lot of political could be thought of as the different ideological and political parties, but also on one level, but also political in terms of the idea of contesting power itself, right? It's the TDC was adjudicating the distribution or the redistribution of power in society in a post-conflict situation. So it is, I agree with you, and you and Haitham laid this out very clearly, that it is political. It's about contestation of power and meaning at this very crucial moment in history. That could also be a model to be transported to other contexts as well. That's kind of one of the ways in which this has been, the work of the Commission and transitional justice process has been framed. So thank you for this. Okay, we have 11 more minutes, so plenty of time to ask more questions and get the speakers to reflect more deeply and engage with us. Wonder if I should jump to my questions or give people more time. Okay, I guess I can ask a question, since, I want to go back to this idea of, the spectacle and dramatization, because I think this is such a fascinating aspect of the transitional justice process and just politics in post-revolution in Tunisia in general. And the role of social media was so great in these situations of the debates and in shaping the reception of the work of the commission. I remember when I was in Tunisia, people would gather. It was really, it was something that people awaited, would gather in homes and watch the public hearings, and there were like tears and emotions, and even fights broke out between people watching the hearings, who held like different political views or disagreed about the whole meaning and the whole process. So it was just a highly charged moment of watching and witnessing. And so I want to go back to that idea and hear more from you about, this the role of mediatization in shaping receptions of the TDC's work, and in making the broader public, not just victims and their families and activists, the broader public really part of this process through the witnessing, and also the ways in which the past has been narratives of the state and the official state narrative about the past, what happened, has been also shaped within that sphere and through this process of mediatization and through the spectacle.
Nathan, do you want to start, or?
Yeah, I guess in fact, it was a whole. Like when we have the institutions, we also like. I want to talk about another thing that happened, which is so similar to the hearings of the TDC, which we had the competition, the televised competition debates between the presidential candidates in the presidential campaign of 2019. We had like a lot of presidents, a lot of people coming on TV, and we had like this whole spectacle saying that we are the first Arabic nation to have a televised debate of president candidates. Look, this is democracy, etc., etc. But the problem is that when 2014, this idea was proposed between Beji Qaid Sibsi and Monsef al-Marzouki, Beji Qaid Sibsi refused that, and because he was so old, he couldn't make a debate of 1 hour or something. And we have been saying that this is like this is not this is a show, this is a spectacle, etc. And we don't do this. And so the double standards that happen, that are the mirror of the system, in a way that this spectacle of having a public hearing of someone who will say that I did this and I did this and I did this, people will normalize with what is being said. These people are being are given platforms to say that we did this, we did that, and you can have your emotional breakdown just in front of a screen, and afterwards we will deal with how to how to pay accountability for this person. So it was, for me, it was an emotional discharge, and that's why people had fights. That's why people broke in tears. That's why it's just an emotional discharge, just for the system to have a discharge from the pressure that's happening from the streets and from the popular demands.
So I was in Tunis for the first public hearings, and I mean, so the public hearings, they were constantly announced in, I mean, I think during over the course of 2016, and then they were always postponed, and it wasn't clear whether they would actually happen or not at all. And so when it was clear that public hearings would be happening, I really wanted to go. to observe basically. And I mean, maybe I start with that. It was actually quite hard to figure out how to get access. And I think it was, at least for these first public hearings, and that was also because there was this whole chaos of, initially they were supposed to take place in central Tunis, and then they were moved, and then the space was small. And I'm coming to the point I want to make a bit later. But so I mean, in the end, I really wanted to go to these hearings because I thought, okay, we don't know whether there will only be one set of hearings, and then afterwards there won't be happening anymore, right? Because you never know. Also, like, one simple economic reason that I knew that I still had funding for my project to go at that point in time, but I wouldn't have more funding later. And so I tried to find out how to get an accreditation, and I was just told by so many people, yeah, you need to get an accreditation, but it was really, really hard to find out how to actually at the beginning. And in the end, I got one, but it was also at that. I mean, I knew that I would get a badge, but or that I would get an accreditation. But then I also just found out by chance that you need to pick it up earlier at the Truth Commission building in central Tunis before going to Sidi Drif later in the evening. And it was also, there were just like so many rumors floating around about who can get access where, and the room is so small. And then fast forward to the setup. So there was this small room in Sidi Drif in the Club Elisa, and what I found really interesting is that the Truth Commission tried to spin this downgrade of venue in the terms of being a purpose of choice. So they basically said like, oh, this is symbolic because this was the club of Leila Ben Ali, and so we're doing these hearings here now. So they tried to not admit in public that they were being sent out of central Tunis, which I found quite interesting because they could have also scandalized it, right? But the choice was to take this as a virtue. And I was able to enter the main hearing room on the first day, which was more by chance. I was so I had an accreditation that would not necessarily would have given me access, but then I was let in. And the second day I went to the overflow tent that they set up next to the building, and where they basically streamed the broadcast. And so I want to talk just one moment about the difference between the two experiences of being in the room and watching the broadcast, because I mean, we're talking about the spectacle, right, and the performance. And I would say that it's heavily curated, not only because of the speakers that were chosen, but also what you could see when you were in the room and what you could see when you were watching the broadcast, because I think there was a stark difference. Also, this is what I wanted to get at. So I think in the room, so the setup was that the victims who were telling their stories, they were sitting with the back to the audience. They were looking at the commissioners, and you could basically just see the faces of the commissioners. You couldn't see the faces of the victims. I mean, you could see them at screens, but you could, I mean, of course, hear their voices, and you could also like hear the emotions of the voices that were put in there. But apart from that, there wasn't any kind of music or something, right? And you had the setup like the commission, the panel, and then which you as the audience could see. You could see the commission asking questions, and you could not directly see the faces of the victims while they were telling the stories, but you could still feel that the audience was touched, because I mean, it was quite emotional. And then the next day I went to the tent and I saw how it looked like for those watching the broadcast. And I would say that this was more spectacleized even, because you could see cats, and there was like an introductory music, and that was like always like put in between with a bit like a dramatic sound, and so there was a yeah, I found it really interesting how these emotional moments, they were even more dramatized for those watching in front of screens than for those who were watching in the room, and it would probably evoke like very different kinds of emotions, right? And I was wondering whether they thought it was necessary to make it more dramatic for people from the screen because they couldn't feel it immediately. But yeah, and then we could also talk about who was allowed in the room and who had to sit outside, right? Who got access to this kind of curated knowledge in a confined manner or in a less confined manner. Yeah, and so I think like I don't know, this is not particularly analytic, but I think in terms of observation, I found this really interesting. How yeah, there seemed to be a bit of even more of a dramatization for television than for those watching in the room, where things were more toned down and yeah.
You know, thank you for this anecdote and firsthand experience, and telling us how it felt, like the energy that was related to these spectacles, and the way that an audience was constructed around that process and those institutions and those public hearings. So I think this is a really fascinating and oftentimes underlooked aspect of truth and dignity commissions and the transitional justice process. So thanks for bringing those points into the discussion. And yeah, so I think we're 3 minutes over. So I think we're fortunately have to end it here. But I thank you so much. I thank Mariam Salhi, I thank Haytham Smida Gesmi in Tunis and Mariam in Germany. Thank you for being with us here today. And I want to thank the audience as well, who are with us in the Zoom, on the Zoom link, and letting you all know that this recording is going to be available on our website. And also, if you're interested in joining other Kevorkian Center events, Amanda has posted the link in the chat room. And also you can sign up for our listserv, so you can get all the announcements of future events, and some of which are happening during the day, so that could work for people in Germany and Tunis as well. It's not always in the afternoon. Some of them are for those who are in New York, but it's a good way to keep like a global audience. Yeah, thank you again. We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Ola.